So here we are. After a bunch of insane performances, the Dallas Mavericks are the winners of the Western Conference and will be advancing to the NBA Finals to face the Boston Celtics. I've already said this, and I said this kind of in the last video. I did not think that this would happen, not even in the slightest. I expected the OKC Thunder to beat this Dallas team in round 2. I expected the Timberwolves to beat them in the conference finals, and both times it was pretty apparent that they were just flat out the better team and or executed better in almost every situation that they've faced in this playoff so far. Game 5, I probably won't go into too much detail. I mean, it was just a good old-fashioned Luka Doncic closeout game masterclass once again, reminiscent of the infamous Game 7 in 2022 against the Phoenix Suns. 20 points in the first quarter, which was pretty much the game. The Mavericks went on a 17-1 run to end the first quarter, and they just never looked back. They built a 20-point lead early in the game, and it was just insurmountable at that point. Even though this Timberwolves team was down 22, the defending champions, the Dallas Mavericks just seemed to have a way better handle on the situation. They forced Rudy Gobert to play make a lot, especially early in the game, in short rolls off of Anthony Edwards' traps, and as a result, Rudy Gobert shot, I believe, 7 shots in the first quarter, which was, of course, the most on the team, which is definitely not ideal. Ant had a pretty good game, 28 points, 10 for 18 from the field, but a lot of it being in pretty low leverage minutes, so sort of take it with a grain of salt. But I want to say congratulations to the Minnesota Timberwolves on what I would consider to be a successful season, considering where they came from last year, literally with Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson fighting each other on the sideline right before the playoffs, being the 8th seed, and then coming into the season being far and away the best defensive team in the league, the improvement of Anthony Edwards, and of course, making the conference finals for the first time in 20 seasons. Now, whether or not they're able to actually keep this roster together is pretty difficult to determine at this point, because Anthony Edwards has his max contract extension that's about to kick in next season, which is going to be $35 million as opposed to the 13 that he was making this year. And so next season, they're already on the books for $185 million, majority of that going to Rudy Gobert with $44 million, Cat with 49, Anthony Edwards with 35, and Jaden McDaniels with 22. A few other players sprinkled in there. We'll see. Monte Morris and Kyle Anderson are not on the books for next year, so that's also something to keep in mind, but we will have plenty of time to talk about that once the offseason actually gets underway. Once again, congratulations to the Minnesota Timberwolves for the season that they just had. They are going to be an issue for the foreseeable future, especially if they keep this core together. Now, the Dallas Mavericks are about to face the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals, which, I don't know, based on everything that I've said so far and how all of those predictions have turned out, I think it might be best to just not make a prediction here, mainly just because I think it's going to be difficult to predict what's about to happen anyway. The Boston Celtics have faced pretty easy competition throughout their entire run through the East. They faced a injured Miami Heat team, which was basically led by Tyler Hero. They faced the Cleveland Cavaliers, who lost Donovan Mitchell halfway through the series, and then they faced the Indiana Pacers, who were arguably the worst playoff defensive team that I've ever seen in my lifetime, while also losing their best player in the middle of the series. And this is not a knock on them. If it seems like that, it's not. You play whoever's in front of you, and that's exactly what they've done, and they've taken care of business so far. The issue becomes what this team is going to look like having to actually face a really great offense and frankly really great defense, and really locked in defense, especially towards the end of the conference finals, after you've been basically coasting through the playoffs so far, and you have basically a 2-week break between game 4 of the Eastern Conference Finals and game 1 of the NBA Finals, which is not until June 6th. We're going to need to see how the Celtics look in that situation, although I imagine after about game 1, that's going to be the Celtics team that Dallas is going to see for pretty much the remainder of the series. In terms of strategy, that's going to be interesting as well, because as we know, the offensive firepower of both Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving have been just too much for every team that they've faced so far, and it's important to note that because they did a lot of their damage in the Timberwolves series with dribble penetration, actually, which is something that was not really expected by anybody going into that series. And the Celtics, especially in the conference finals, looked pretty shaky when it came to dribble penetration, and that was against Andrew Nembhard and TJ McConnell. And so now they're going up against Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. Now, while it is worth noting that both Andrew Nembhard and TJ McConnell are both faster, well, much faster players than Luka Doncic. Even though Luka is slow, we've known this for years, even though Luka is slower than a lot of guards in the league or a lot of point guards in the league, his craftiness will get him to the paint eventually. Even when he has an all-NBA level defender in front of him, it doesn't even really matter. Jaden McDaniels was getting beat by Luka Doncic the entire series just off of pure craftiness rather than speed. And so I imagine that that's going to be a pretty huge issue for Boston going into the series. Although, again, it is worth mentioning, Kristaps Porzingis being at the rim is going to be huge for the Celtics as he is now returning from injury. And I imagine that if he had been there for the Pacers series, then we would have seen a lot less dribble penetration or a lot less points in the paint in comparison to what we actually saw. And so it is going to be interesting, although, again, in response to that, the Dallas Mavericks just faced Rudy Gobert. And so again, I don't know. You can like make assumptions about everything that's going on here, but you just don't know if any of this is actually gonna matter. It's gonna be interesting in terms of matchups. I imagine that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are gonna get a lot of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving minutes. We might see Drew Holiday on Kyrie some. We might see him on Luka some possessions, but probably not as much. But I imagine that they're gonna be using Drew Holiday as more of a help side defender, especially when they start to try to get to those kickouts to people like PJ Washington, Derrick Jones Jr., players like that. And so it's going to be interesting to see what they do matchup wise, but I assume that they'll go with the bigger players. Jason Tatum, probably the best perimeter defender that they have, so I imagine he's going to be on Luka a lot. Kyrie is probably going to be facing a rotation of defenders throughout the entire series. I imagine Drew Holiday, Jaylen Brown, Derek White. Also, I want to pay attention to what they're going to do in pick and rolls. Kristaps Porzingis is pretty mobile usually, but coming off of injury, it is going to be interesting to see how he looks, especially in that first game back when they inevitably start putting him in that high pick and roll, especially with Kyrie going downhill. But over on the Celtics side, we're going to be seeing probably a lot of mismatch hunting, which is mainly what their offense consists of. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, because there isn't really, I suppose Kyrie would be the weakest defender on the floor. Derrick Jones Jr. and PJ Washington are pretty interchangeable on defense, so I imagine that there won't be that many switches between them. The main players that they're going to attack on defense are probably going to be Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. Kyrie because he's smaller and Luka because he is slower. And so especially players like Derek White are probably going to be trying to get downhill with that. The thing that I'm concerned about for Dallas specifically is the fact that Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively are going to be taken away from the rim with Kristaps Porzingis being back, because he is going to be spaced out at the three-point line in the Celtics 5-out offense. And so you're not really going to have as much rim protection as you did in the conference finals, where you had Rudy Gobert in the paint that you didn't really have to worry about, especially from an offensive perspective. Now you're going to be going up against Kristaps Porzingis, who is not the craziest offensive player, but is still pretty capable and can space out to basically the logo. And so that's going to be something to look at going forward. I'm just word vomiting my thoughts as they come to me, because again, I really don't know what is about to happen in this series. There's going to be a lot of strengths and weaknesses on both sides, probably pretty obvious ones too. But I do think that this series is ultimately going to come down to the shot making from the stars. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving. And for role players, you're looking at PJ Washington again, Derek White, Drew Holiday, who has been outstanding the entire playoffs. Those are going to be the main things to look at, I believe. But I think that's about all that I can really confidently say at this point. We will have to wait until game 1 to see, which is again in a week. On Gold Blooded, we have been doing a new segment called Dynasty Rewind, in which we take a look back at some of the more memorable moments from the Golden State Warriors dynasty and basically just rewatch the whole games. We will be rewatching the 2013 27-point comeback against the Toronto Raptors on Saturday, June 1st, if you're seeing this before then. So if that is something that you're interested in, I know a lot of my fans are Golden State Warriors fans as well. If that's something that you're interested in, you can go follow us on playback.tv, shown on the screen and also linked in the description and the pinned comment. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're new, hit the bell to be notified when I upload, comment down below what you want to see next, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.